Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got the whole crew with us, Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, on this Saturday night as we wrap up Georgia's Week 2 victory over Tennessee Tech. Georgia wins 48-3. Was very much on the verge of a shutout. Bobby Wilder decided to have a little bit of fun with special teams toward the end of the game, but another one-sided performance for the Bulldogs. I don't think anything was too surprising. Do want to point out I had a 45-point margin of victory in my prediction earlier this week for this game. But a lot to get into from this one. Carson Beck throws 5 touchdowns, which ties the program record. I believe he's now one of 8 Georgia quarterbacks who have done that. And the last one, very notably, Stetson Bennett against UAB, a game that, as we've talked about some this offseason, was a game that Carson Beck thought was going to be his first start. So kind of fitting there. Trevor Etienne makes his debut. A couple of injury notes to make along the way, but Ben, I'm going to throw it to you. You and I were both here on hand in Sanford Stadium. What stood out to you from this performance? Georgia moving to 2-0 and doing it in pretty one-sided fashion here in the first game in Sanford Stadium this fall.
Well, I'll point out I was the only one that had the courage to say that Tennessee Tech would score points in this game. So, Bobby Wilder was doing me really the favor there at the end of the game to split the difference on the 0-6 for them that we had predicted. But I think Kirby Smart's reaction to it after the game sort of summed it up. Like, he didn't get overly excited about anything that they did. I think that his reaction was Georgia did what Georgia was supposed to do in this game. He acknowledged that there was a clear talent disparity, that Tennessee Tech was going to have a lot of trouble with Georgia up front. And that was the case. Georgia, like you said, Georgia, when they know that they can run the ball at will, they can pretty much do whatever they want offensively. And I think that showed up. Georgia probably wasn't even as sharp as it could have been offensively. And, almost 500 yards. Carson Beck throws for 5 touchdowns, score a touchdown on the first offensive play of the game, 22 yards from Carson Beck to Dylan Bell. So really, I think that this was a business-like approach type of game for Georgia, where they're supposed to be leading 48-0, 59 minutes and 58 seconds in. And I think that in some ways, I think Kirby's a sicko, and I think that he probably is somewhat glad that they gave up that field goal at the end, because it shows that young group, like, hey, you were not perfect. Here's the things that you need to get better at. And I think that also just has a carrot for this defense that through 2 weeks still has not given up a touchdown. They're going to Kentucky next week, who's struggling mightily offensively right now against South Carolina as we record this podcast. So, we talked about it after the Clemson game. This Georgia defense feels like it has the possibility of being a special one, putting up a 3 spot 2 weeks in a row against Clemson and then a very overmatched team in Tennessee Tech. I think that that's the type of defense that we can come to expect from Georgia, which a lot of people will just brush it off and say, oh, that's what the Georgia defense has been every year. And, whatever. We saw leaks in Georgia's defense at times last season. And so far this year, granted, 2 entirely different opponents, 2 entirely different matchups and, what sort of challenges they present. But either way, no touchdowns through 2 weeks. I think that this defense has a chance to be very, very special.
Yeah, you will definitely take that. Georgia outgains Tennessee Tech 498-134. Big game, as I mentioned, Carson Beck, 18 of 25 through the air, 242 yards, 5 touchdowns, no interceptions, was not sacked. Definitely a good performance there. For the longest time in this game, Tennessee Tech just said, we're going to run the ball. And, they had an issue with their starting quarterback from week 1, was not able to go. Had a few different guys involved. Jordan Potts, who played really well against MTSU. Jordan Yates, a guy that some folks will probably remember from Georgia Tech, was a quarterback there for a while. And it did not go well for the Golden Eagles, but I don't think they expected it to go well. Kipp, I like having you on the podcast where you had a chance to watch on TV. It's a little bit different experience from being on hand and watching from the new press box here in Sanford Stadium. But what stood out to you from what you got to see? What do you feel like really jumped off the screen?
Well, I got to watch most of the game. I have to say there were portions of the game where we saw a black screen. So I was getting the audio file version for part of the game. But, there's positives and there's definitely some areas where I'm sure Kirby's going to, hammer it home next week in practice. I mean, the positives for Georgia, obviously coming out and having 11 straight completions for Carson Beck. I think they ended up having 11 different pass catchers as well. It's good to get in a rhythm with different guys out there. And I know that, it could be a little frustrating for fans. They want to see one guy have 10 catches for 200 yards, have a monster game. But this is Georgia's offense. They have a deep group of playmakers, and he did a good job using them. At the same time, some throws that I think he would have wanted to have back. He missed. I believe there was a ball to Arian Smith that he missed, the deep ball where he was just rolling out. I think that that isn't a gimme throw, but the throw he should make. Even the deep ball to Arian Smith, he lofted it up there. But we've also seen in the past. I mean, that pass has been missed. I remember Stetson Bennett missed on a couple of those where the guy was wide open. So he at least hit him. But there's still some throws again that he'd want to have back, especially that 2-minute drill there at the end when they had 50 seconds left and the penalty to start the drive, but then a couple throws that came up incomplete. I just think that there's still some areas of this offense that you can still fine tune. Overall, though, you got to be really impressed with the defense. We're talking back on score predictions again. If Bobby Wilder does not get crazy there at the end, I'm 1 point off of my prediction in this game. So we can all say we came close, but I really Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, kind of that game where you're like, okay, this is what we've been waiting for. He's healthy and he's playing a lot of snaps in back-to-back games now. Probably, I don't know the numbers, but I'm going to guess that it's probably the highest 2-game, back-to-back snap total that he's had in his career to date. But I mean, he won battles that he should win against Tennessee Tech, but still, really positive to see his performance out there.
Yeah, I want to mention 4 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, good performance. And Kirby talked about this a little in the post game of, he just needs to be healthy. And the fact that he is healthy. And again, he played a lot in week 1 and now week 2, which we can kind of talk about the injury picture a little bit here in a second. Not having a Michael Williams makes Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins even more important. And I thought he played really, really well. Wanted to talk too about Trevor Etienne. He didn't play a ton, but he did make his Georgia debut on Saturday. 5 carries, 78 yards. Biggest play was a 45-yard run where he made an absolutely great cut to get to the outside and broke it down the line with a big run. Caught a couple passes too, nothing crazy, but was able to catch some passes. Ben, what did you think of our first chance to watch Trevor Etienne as a Bulldog? What he got to show, albeit in a small sample size?
I mean, he made it pretty obvious as to why Georgia wanted to pursue him in the transfer portal to me. I mean, what was it? You said 5 carries for 86 yards. So the yards per clip was pretty clear. It also looked to me, and I think that they didn't show it as much, but Carson Beck, I think, feels very comfortable with Trevor Etienne as a receiving option. And I think he loves knowing that he has that running back that is a true receiving threat. He's a yards after the catch threat. We talked a lot last week about the juice that Nate Frazier brought in open space, and you can see that with Trevor Etienne. I mean, I don't think this surprises anyone. I mean, this is a guy that has done it in SEC football. Georgia has seen it firsthand last season, how much he can damage a defense real quick with some of that short burst. And so I wasn't surprised by anything that we saw. It was nice after all of the offseason questions and is he going to play? Is he not going to play? Is it a suspension? Is it not a suspension? All that. I'm glad that that's now behind it and we can just watch Trevor Etienne play football. And the Georgia running back room, it's amazing that, you look at what's happened so far this year. Trevor Etienne's out for week 1. Branson Robinson's coming back from what was once thought to be a catastrophic knee injury. Roderick Robinson goes out after having a really good fall camp. Nate Frazier today leaves. Kirby Smart says that he would have been fine to go back in, but has a little bit of a shoulder injury. It's not been a perfect picture or story when it comes to the running back room, yet I feel like Georgia feels as confident with that group as they really could. And so I think that that's a testament to how talented the room is. I'll even note, Chauncey Bowens, I thought showed a lot of positive things today. He got in last week. He got in this week. Dwight Phillips even got a touch and had a lot of positive yards, and that resulted in even more because he got hit out of bounds, and everyone would probably said, oh, shoot, I didn't realize this guy runs a 10-second 100-meter dash, and all of a sudden you're shoving the guy out of bounds because you just didn't know he was as fast as he was. And so the threats that Georgia poses in this running back room is impressive, and I think that Trevor Etienne's the best of the group.
Yeah, I thought he was super impressive. Again, 5 carries, 78 yards, that 45-yard touchdown. Kipp, what did you think of what Trevor showed? And again, like Ben said, this is a good point that they're not 100% in the running back room right now. But I know a lot of coaches would kill to have what Georgia has in the backfield right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Trevor Etienne has looked really dangerous as a runner, and I think, again, still pretty new to the team. I think he's going to get better each and every week. For me, shout out to Branson Robinson. Had a tough debut against Clemson. Looked a lot more confident in this game, and the touchdown run. I mean, it just that run was impressive. The other run where I think he ran like 11 or 12 yards and just kind of drove the defender back several yards. That was more where, okay, lest we not forget, Branson never, ever, ever skipped leg day. I mean, that was where you're reminded this guy squats, like 3 or 4 of me. And so that's kind of, again, it was impressive, and it was a big win for Branson just to play last week against Clemson. Didn't have the performance that, anyone wanted, but I think this week you saw a little bit more of, his tackle breaking ability and being more decisive as a runner. And as you guys said, I mean, these guys are always going to be banged up. They're always going to take more hits than anyone else. I think Nate Frazier, it may be the same shoulder that he had banged up in camp. So he's dealt with a shoulder injury before. They got to keep getting all 3, 4, 5 of these guys in the game to get that experience for him. So I think this was big for all their confidence. But yeah, seeing Etienne out there, and a reminder that Georgia has, between Trevor Etienne and Nate Frazier, they got 2 explosive playmakers out of the backfield that they haven't had the last couple of years.
Take a quick break, come back, talk a little bit about the injury updates out of Saturday's game, and then just kind of bounce around from other things that we felt like stood out in week 2. But when you play a game like Georgia did on Saturday against an FCS opponent, the biggest thing is trying to stay healthy. I think for the most part, Georgia did that. A couple of situations that need updates. Oscar Delp was dealing with an ankle injury. Asked Kirby about this after the game. Kirby said had a slight ankle sprain, so we'll see. I thought he could have gone, but held him out after halftime, which is obviously a good sign. Warren Brinson didn't play. Kirby said wasn't able to go today. Hopefully he'll be back. I think that he'll have a chance for that Kentucky game. Nate Frazier, as Kipp mentioned, had looked like he took a shot to the shoulder. Kirby said he thought he could have gone back in, and it was basically a situation where they got to a point where they were subbing other people in, and they just didn't push it. So good news, I think, on the injury front. We'll have to keep paying attention to the Michael Williams situation going into Kentucky. He was in a boot before the game Saturday, obviously did not play. I think Kirby just basically said he's hurt, trying to work his way back. So that's going to be something to watch. And something to pay attention to going forward. Guys, let's talk about some other people we thought stood out, other parts of this game that stood out. And Ben, I'm going to kind of put you on the spot, but we were talking a good bit about Anthony Evans today, and I just wanted you to talk about what you saw, the danger, especially him as a punt returner. That dude is super fearless.
Yeah, Jordan, I think it might have been you that mentioned him on the pre-game pod, talking about him as someone to watch in this game, and he immediately had an impact. I mean, you could make the case that his punt return, to start the game basically and effectively ended the game, because once Georgia only needed 22 yards for that first play of the game, Tennessee Tech wasn't catching them. I will say, I don't know if I'm just watching. It's the way that it feels when I'm watching it. To me, Anthony Evans is a very aggressive punt returner. Like, he fields punts that I feel like past Georgia punt returners have not fielded. I don't know if that's the confidence that he has. I don't know if that's the confidence that the coaching staff has placed into him. I don't know if they're saying, hey, let's test some things out, or Tennessee Tech, you're probably not going to have guys coming quite as fast on the GPS monitor coming up to you. Like, maybe give it a test, whatever. I'm just going to say that there were some risky ones today, including that first one that he fielded and took it back. I don't know. I think it was 46 yards and flipped the field, but I thought he should have fair caught that one just based on how it was being covered. And he didn't feel that way, and he was clearly right because he returned it to the other side of the field. And so very electric playmaker. He's the type of guy that everyone talked about when he was getting recruited, and why when he committed to Oklahoma originally, Georgia didn't stop pushing for him because they knew that he had this kind of dynamic ability. It's fun. I mean, when you get to watch a game where you have a return guy like Anthony Evans, where you just don't know, is he going to take this one to the house? Is he going to flip the field? But it feels like he's probably going to try and attempt a return more often than not. I mean, every time that the other team's punting, I think you got to sit up in your seat and see what happens. So it's fun to watch.
Yeah, I thought it was funny. I think it might have been his second return. It didn't go very far, and it looked kind of risky. And I was kind of watching down there like, I bet Kirby's about to lay into him. Kirby's walking over, and then he gets in Dan Jackson's face because he wasn't exactly thrilled with the block that Dan Jackson made. Another guy I thought stood out, in my opinion, Lawson Lucky with the big touchdown. I mean, the fact that we've seen that 2 weeks in a row, him being involved in a big way, I think we're going to continue to see that. And again, obviously, it sounds pretty good for Oscar Delp as far as getting back, but to have Lawson Lucky is really big. Just looking at some of the defensive stats, Christian Miller had another good game. I think that's a guy they're going to continue to count on. Jalen Walker, like what we saw from him early in this one. So several guys stood out. Sometimes it's hard, especially in the moment, to keep up with as much as they're subbing. Like what we saw from Gunnar Stockton from what he got to play. And Kirby talked about that being big for him. So much of a lot of the games he's played in is just mop up duty and, hey, hand the ball off and let the clock run out. And, he got a chance to play a good bit on Saturday, which is only going to help him going forward. Kipp, did anyone else stand out to you? Any guy that we haven't really talked about that you want to shout out for what they did in week 2? You'll have to unmute to
Kipp.
Shout out to Arian Smith for setting a new career high for receptions in a season in 2 games. His previous high was 9, and he never had any more than 3 catches in a game. And now he's had back-to-back games with more than 3 catches in a game. I think this is big for him, and this is just that story of a guy coming back, working hard to improve himself as a player, and that work paying off. I think this is a guy that Georgia's been looking for several seasons now. They needed that part of the offense, and now Arian Smith is bringing it to the table. I mean, I think that every ball that was catchable for him in this game, I think he reeled them all in, and that's just an aspect of his game that, again, the coaching staff pushed him this offseason. I think that was the one thing I heard over and over again, is that Arian is really getting pushed in practice. They are giving him a ton of reps. He's working after practice. He's working on this. And I think that from a guy who came in known as kind of like a track star who also plays football, he's a legit football player. And anytime he can haul in a 50-yard reception and have 4 catches for 73 yards in back-to-back big games, when before, he might go missing for a month and a half. It says a lot to all the work he's put in. So, yeah, that, again, Lawson Lucky, 30-plus yard catches in back-to-back games. All the talk, this offseason was about bringing in Yarosek and Oscar Delp, and then, the departure of Brock Bowers. But Lawson Lucky has been that big play guy at the tight end position so far through 2 games, I should say, this season. And then one other note, this is one where Kirby's probably just foaming at the mouth to talk to his team about. Back-to-back games with too many penalties. It's there 9 penalties in a game like this. There's no excuse for that. They averaged less than 5 last season. They were in the top 10 as far as fewest penalties a game. I think this may be kind of the other side of having such a young team and having so many new players. But they had 7 penalties against Clemson, 9 penalties against Tennessee Tech. You can't have that, because that's the sneaky yardage that in the important games you don't that could make or break one of these close games against the Texas or an Alabama. That's just an aspect that I think Kirby Smart's really, really going to probably push these guys in practice, obviously on Tuesday, to kind of clean this stuff up as they head into conference play.
Well, guys, let's talk just briefly about week 2 to this point. Obviously, games still going on. Anything that stood out to us? Syracuse, Fran Brown, shout out 2-0, a 31-28 win over Georgia Tech, and he seemed pretty fired up about that after the fact. Texas winning in the Big House, 31-12 over Michigan. Arkansas, just a total crazy game, 39-31, double overtime loss to Oklahoma State. I'm very shocked by Auburn losing to Cal 21-14. Didn't see that coming. Ben, anything else catch your eye from what has happened to this point in week 2 of the season?
I mean, got to be Notre Dame losing, right? I mean, that's probably the most, significant loss of playoff caliber team so far in the season. I mean, I guess you could point to the Texas-Michigan game earlier today, but I think that one went how a lot of people expected it to go. I'll give a personal shout out, Jordan. I've been talking with you about this a bunch, but good buddy of mine, Chris Hightower, he started as an intern in the Georgia Strength program, went to Marshall, and now is at Northern Illinois. He's 4-0 against Notre Dame in the last 6 years at his various stops, being at Georgia, Marshall, and Northern Illinois. So wanted to give a shout out to my good buddy, Chris Hightower, who I do think will listen to this as a Georgia alum.
Love to see it. Kipp, anything else catch your eye from what's happened to this point on Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, I've given Graham Mertz a lot of grief as far as where I think he stacks up in the SEC as among quarterbacks. Not trying to raise him up too far, but now, I mean, looking at Peyton Thorne's performance today, watching him out there, he really struggled. I think I saw the stat from Matt Zenitz where he's finished 11 of his 13 games against FBS opponents with 165 passing yards or less. That's pretty brutal. He's averaging 125 passing yards per game, 15 touchdowns, 13 picks against FBS opponents. Those are some brutal numbers for him. So I think honestly that offensive line got their butts whipped against Cal. And so that was probably my biggest surprise, just how badly they performed at the line of scrimmage in that game.
Yeah, I think they might have been a 2-touchdown favorite, so definitely not a good look, especially playing there in Jordan-Hare. Want to make sure to mention this, and we'll wrap up the episode here. A shocker, in my opinion, was in Lexington. South Carolina whooped Kentucky 31-6. Not a good game for Brock Vandagriff, his first SEC game. 3 of 10. 30 yards, no touchdowns, an interception. I'll start with you, Kipp. Just initial thoughts on next week's matchup. Georgia going to Lexington after Kentucky really took one on the chin against South Carolina.
Yeah, I think it kind of takes a little bit of, I guess, maybe the mystery out of it for us because he looked a little bit lost out there. I'm going to be honest. He kind of showed maybe why Carson Beck was the clear quarterback too in the pass in front with Brock Vandagriff. They're going to have to scramble a little bit there because I think he got like maybe a little over one completion a quarter in that game. He looked like still in the developmental process of his journey, and he's been in college long enough to where he should be a lot further along in his progressions. And so I just think for Georgia that pass rush is going to pin its ears back and probably get home a couple times because it does look like that aspect of Georgia's game as far as having explosive negative plays. I think that so far they look like they're up for the task more than they were last season.
Ben, what about you? Again, Kentucky, bad game. Were sacked 5 times, turned the ball over twice, just 183 yards of offense. A very poor showing at home against the Gamecocks.
I know this sounds I'm shocked how badly that they looked. I'm also going to say I still think that it's going to be a game in Lexington next week. I know that sounds crazy, but first road games of the year in SEC play. Kirby alluded to it today that he thinks people don't fully respect how hard it is to go win in Lexington, how hard it is to just win on the road in the SEC period. And I do think that this was a bit of a look ahead spot for South Carolina with Georgia coming to town next week and, whatever. And it's not an excuse for Kentucky by any means, but I don't necessarily think the version of Kentucky that we saw today is what Georgia is going to be expecting to see next week.
I would totally agree. Well, either one of you guys, any parting thoughts before we wrap this thing up?
I mean, not really any parting thoughts, but I will say we've talked about it a little bit, the package where they've got Malachi Starks at star, and then they've got Dan Jackson and KJ Bolden at the deep safety. They were running that on third down today. I mean, Janelle Aguero, first play of the game, gets a 4-yard tackle for a loss. So it seems like that's what they want to go with primarily, but I am interested to see if in a third and long package, if they're going with that Malachi at star and then Dan and KJ at deep safety, because until KJ got a little banged up, and I think he was totally fine, but until he got a little banged up, every third and long situation that they had, that's the look they were going with. So it's something that I'm just going to be watching for going forward.
Yeah, just mention that KJ Bolden did leave for a little bit, was getting some attention on the sideline, came back into the game, so I don't think it's anything serious. Kip, any parting thoughts before we end this episode?
Georgia's got so much speed at linebacker. When Justin Williams and Chris Cole were in the game, they got some good snaps in there. And I just think this is just one of those games where you can't really take a lot from it from an analysis standpoint. But the value for Kirby Smart in Georgia, it's just these were very valuable snaps. And I just think especially getting Jonel Aguero in there, getting Gunnar Stockton in there, getting Trevor Etienne in there, guys who didn't play last week, before you go on the road to SEC play, it was crucial for Georgia, and it does set them up for a much better week of practice because there's still plenty of teaching points that Kirby's going to utilize from this film.
We're going to wrap it up right there. Georgia wins 48-3. I appreciate Kip and Ben for popping on. Thanks everyone who watched this live, everyone who is watching or listening to it after the fact. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, the Junkyard Dawgcast. And we'll wrap it up. We're going to go grab some dinner and catch some of these late games. So for Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.